Hi, Carrie, that's me. That's my ID number.
Gotcha, no problem.
Right, so Carrie, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is City Councilor Michael Flaherty, and I'm the chair of the Community Preservation Acts Committee. This hearing is being held in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its hearings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this working session virtually via Zoom.
Mr. Chair, one second. Hopefully you could just mute yourself and that will correct it, but you're coming in really, really choppy.
Is that better, Carrie?
No, unfortunately not.
Carrie, did you get any of the disclaimers?
It's still really choppy. I wonder if you maybe went into your audio settings and clicked automatically adjust or undid that. Maybe that might help.
How about without the video? Does that get a better feed for us?
No, it's still really choppy.
Carrie, I'm going to get off and reboot. Carrie, is that a little better this time?
That'll do it. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is City Councilor Michael Flaherty, Chair of the Committee on Community Preservation Act. This hearing is being held in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 that modifies certain requirements of the open meeting law, and it relieves public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this working session virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to the public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate and alternative means. The public may watch this working session via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV and live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date. Written comments can also be sent to the City Council's committee at the email ccc.go@boston.gov. That's ccc.go@boston.gov, and will be made part of the record and available to all of the City Councilors. We are here today to hold a hearing on Docket 0548. It's a message in order approving an appropriation of $1,012,400 for the administrative and operating expenses of the City of Boston's Community Preservation Committee, known as CPC, for the fiscal year 2022, and a further appropriation order in the amount of $28,479,574 from the Community Preservation Fund known as the fund, estimated annual revenues for fiscal year 2022 to be appropriated and reserved for future appropriation. The fund was created by the adoption of the CPA in November 2016 and is funded in part by a 1% property tax-based surcharge on residential and business property tax bills that took effect in July 2017, and an annual state distribution from the Massachusetts Community Preservation Trust Fund. General Laws, Chapter 44B, Section 6 provides that in each fiscal year, the council shall make appropriations from the fund as it deems necessary for the administrative and operating expenses of the CPC, and that such appropriations shall not exceed 5% of the fund's annual revenues. The fund's estimated annual revenues for fiscal year 2022 are $29,491,975, and an appropriation in the amount of $1,012,400 is being requested to fund the CPC operations of fiscal year 22, or 3.4% of fiscal year 22 estimated annual revenues. Additionally, in order to appropriate or reserve funds for future spending in fiscal year 2022, the appropriation in the amount of $28,479,574 is requested to be appropriated into reserve for future recommendations by the CPC and appropriation by the Boston City Council consistent with the Act. Here with us today on behalf of the administration, we have Drew Smith from the Treasury, who will be providing opening remarks. Maura Zurin, who's the revenue manager of OBM, will also be providing opening remarks. Sarah Zimmerman, Treasury, is also here to assist the council with any questions, as is Courtney Wayland from the Treasury. So before I open it up, I would like to offer my colleagues, if they choose, a brief opening remarks, and or they can waive them for us to get started. So I do know that my colleague, City Council Liz Braden, joining us, who represents Alston Brighton, is on the Zoom. Good afternoon, Councillor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions or comments at this time. I just want to thank everyone for the great work. The CPA is a really important addition to our toolkit to support historic preservation, affordable housing and green space. So I really appreciate all the great work. Thank you.
It's always exciting when we get an opportunity to start talking about new applications for every neighbor in the city. So with that, Drew, I know that colleagues will be joining, but if you could just offer your opening remarks, which will be followed by Maura Zurin, and then we'll get into some questions.
Great, thanks very much. And I think what we'll do is I'll offer a few remarks, and then I'm going to turn it to Maura, and then I'll close this out. But I would like to thank the chairman, Councilor Braden, and the committee for having us today to discuss the CPA's fiscal 22 administrative budget request and a request to reserve fiscal 22 project dollars that will be used after further appropriation to fund the fiscal 22 funding round projects later this year. With me today, as you mentioned, is Maura Zurin, the Assistant Director for Revenue Forecasting and Policy for the Office of Budget Management. I serve as Deputy CFO and Head of Treasury for the city, Treasury being the department that manages CPA. Also on hand to field any specific questions that you may have that I'm not able to answer are Sally Zimmerman and Courtney Wayland, who both serve as project consultants for the CPC. Not with us today is our Deputy Director, Thaddean Brown, who is taking some well-deserved time away. Before I dive into the details of the specific requests, I'd like to ask Maura to discuss the CPA's funding generally and provide a bit more detail as to how we came to the top line figures that you have in front of you. I'd like to note that for the sake of brevity, the numbers we present will generally be approximate, but we're certainly able to get down to the cents if you like. I assume we might. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maura.
Thanks, Drew, and thank you to the chairman and the committee for having us today. The total budget available for the CPA in fiscal year 2022, which will start on July 1, 2021, is recommended at approximately $29.5 million. This amount will be divided into two buckets, just like was mentioned. One is the funds dedicated to the administrative budget and the funds dedicated for the projects. The revenue supporting the CPA has three main components. One is the 1% property tax surcharge. We receive a state match and any remaining fund balance from previous years. Specifically, we are projecting to collect in fiscal year 2022 $22.5 million in property tax surcharge based on a modest increase in property values. Now, given the many uncertainties in the market right now, specifically around commercial properties, we didn't want to over budget, so we won't have any issues in the future. We expect the state match, which comes from the state's CPA trust fund, to be $3.3 million. The trust fund revenues are derived from a surcharge placed on all real estate transactions at the state's registries of deeds. And just as a reference, the surcharge for most documents filed at the registries is $50. We sometimes receive an additional state match funds through the state supplemental process, but we can't know in advance if and how much will be available. So we're only budgeting based on the CPA trust fund amount. Finally, we also assume to use $3.7 million of remaining fund balance from fiscal year 2021, taking into account any unused admin dollars or revenue surplus that is left at the end of the year. And I'll return it back to Drew to talk about spending.
Thanks very much, Maura. And as the chairman is aware, in April, we requested and were approved for $25.5 million in funding for the slate of projects recommended through the fiscal 21 funding round. Thank you for that. And let me tell you that those agreements have been distributed and the process of funding those projects is already well underway. We're excited to see their work as it progresses. And to assist that work in its progression, today we request appropriation of the fiscal 22 administrative budget and also reservation of project dollars expected to fund the fiscal 22 slate of projects. While we are still early in the fiscal 22 round and have no project information yet, we look forward to sharing those recommendations with you once the round is complete later this year and early next year.
Very good. Thank you, Drew and Maura. But one just housekeeping matter is that with respect to public testimony and those wishing to submit via email, I gave the government operations site. So it's ccc.cpa@boston.gov. For anyone that's listening or views the rebroadcast, they could send an email. They could submit testimony via email to ccc.cpa@boston.gov. We've also been joined by my colleague, Kenzie Bark, as well. Just a couple of brief questions, because obviously more answered a couple of the ones that I had is, I guess in this maybe probably more directed at Thaddean, I know who is not available, but I was curious as when you anticipate the project recommendations coming before the council for approval. And also need to probably more for Thaddean is do we anticipate a need for more staffing or any increases in administrative or operating costs, just given that as the program becomes more popular, it's been the buzz in all the neighborhoods. As a citywide councilor, I get asks and requests all the time, and you're out in the community meetings, and there are things that are happening in the neighborhoods that people are obviously in dire need of funding. So I would expect that the application process, will continue to get significant numbers and or increases every year. So just curious to see whether or not more staffing is available. And then just lastly, explaining sort of how the CPCA works in conjunction with other city departments to not only maximize the resources, but to not duplicate efforts, and whether that's on the housing side with D&D or whether it's, in the open space with parks and or the historic preservation stuff with landmarks, and making sure that obviously where everyone's in our own lane, but that we're maximizing efforts and resources about, servicing the public on that front. So those are just a couple of the questions that I have, and then we'll go to my colleague Liz Braden and my colleague Kenzie Bark for their questions.
Sure. So let me start with the administrative budget. So the fiscal 22 budget requests a total of $1,012,400. That's an increase of approximately $230,000 or 29.4% over fiscal 21. At the recommended level, the administrative budget would account for 3.43% of revenues, which, as you mentioned, is below the 5% statutory cap that we have, but above the 2.97% approved in fiscal 21. The primary drivers for the increase this year over previous years is a $91,000 net increase in personnel costs, as we added a deputy director and program manager position and phased out the outreach coordinator position. Also, one of the things driving it is a $134,000 increase for contractual services as we add support for an open space consultant and strategic planning services. Councilor or Chairman, this a lot of those additions there is the beginning of our attempt to really kind of build out staff to make sure that we continue to be able to handle the ever increasing number of projects that not only are we dealing with on an annual basis, but as we take projects into inventory, we have larger responsibilities for compliance over the ensuing 15 years. So you're exactly right, and that's one of the things that this particular administrative budget focuses on. As far as when you could expect the additional projects, we expect it's largely going to be on the same timetable that was used for fiscal 21. So we would come before the council again with a full slate of projects in early calendar 22. And certainly can keep you updated and give you more information as we have those. As far as how, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, I was going to thank you for answering those two.
You bet. As far as how we work with various other city departments in determining allocation, certainly one of the most prominent examples is going to be the work we do with D&D. Certainly when D&D is making a request, they're very well aware of the various funding sources that they have available to them. Treasury also helps administer the Neighborhood Housing Trust. So we certainly keep all of those things in mind, and we make sure that the CPC is aware of various other funding sources that are coming into the specific projects as they're reviewing them. But we will continue to endeavor to make sure that we fund these projects as efficiently as possible. And a big part of that is making sure that we know what other city resources are available and how they're coordinating together.
That's great. Thank you very much, Drew. And recognize my colleague, City Council Liz Braden. Liz, you have any questions of the panel?
Thank you. So how many personnel do you have altogether? You have a personnel budget that's gone up by 91,000. How many staff do you have?
So right now, staff in-house, we have 2 city proper or city employees proper, and then we have 2 consultants. We are about to bring on an additional open space consultant, and this budget accounts for the fact that we do expect to bring on a director for the CPC this year. This budget also accounts for the addition of a program manager to assist, and that would certainly be a city employee as well.
Okay, that's good. And in terms of outreach, Alston Brighton's the second largest neighborhood in the city, and we had 2 projects last year, and that was it. And I'm constantly trying to raise up the issue of CPA projects, but it's in terms of outreach to communities. How does that happen?
So I'm going to answer the question quickly and then defer to Sally and Courtney to maybe answer it a little bit more slowly if it's helpful. But what I will say is that we are in the beginning in the throes of the strategic planning process now, which we're required to do by statute. A big part of strategic planning is going to be to determine ways that we can engage even to an even better extent in community outreach to make sure that we're hitting as many different communities as possible and we're meeting folks where they are. So that has certainly been a focus of ours over the last number of years. It will continue to be an even larger focus. It's very important to the CPC that we see projects from every single neighborhood. So I certainly hear you. And Sally or Courtney, did you have anything that you'd like to add, any detail on what we've actually done? It looks like we've got Sally.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Braden. We do have a pipeline project for Alston Brighton, and we also have an interesting, very preliminary study of potential Alston Brighton projects that we will pursue as part of strategic planning.
Thank you.
And Counselor, I'll just add that we've had a number of virtual meet and greets over the past year because of COVID, and we've continued it because we've gotten such good turnout. We've had an informational kickoff session, and we'd be more than happy to come to your district if you want to coordinate something. We're doing something now with Counselor Flynn. So we're here and we're happy to share our information. So that is always an option from us. We're happy to do it.
Thank you very much. And we really do, I think COVID has upset the apple cart a little. So I hope that we could maybe set up an in-person information session, maybe in the fall when we get through the summer. Thank you.
And our eligibility forms are accepted until August 20th. So if you have any in your district, please send them our way.
Okay. And what's the cutoff? August, what date? August 20th.
For eligibility form.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Chair recognizes Councillor Kenzie Bark at this time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Happy to be here. And as people know, CPA is very close to my heart. I campaigned hard for it back in 2016. And it's great to think that we're already at that marking point of actually doing another strategic plan. So glad to hear about that, Drew and all. And I'm coming to you from the Boston Common, where I can report that the frog pond is now open for use, speaking of open space. Drew, I just had a couple of questions, and they're honestly, they're things that I had hammered with Emma at every CPA hearing. And so now coming your way. One is, as we think about strategic planning and consultancy, I think we have a real interest in thinking about how the program can better support historic preservation projects across the whole district and work with folks, folks who may have less resources around to sort of do the necessary prep to put a historic preservation project before us. Because I do think we've seen a little bit of lopsidedness there. And I know that there's been long interest in the historic preservation community, which I share, in the possibility of some preservation planning being supported with the administrative 5%. And so I would love to hear kind of where we are on that front from your perspective.
Sure. So thanks very much for the question. We have been working with Environment to figure out a way that CPA can participate in funding a historic preservation survey. Certainly it's something that is allowed for using CPA administrative funds, and we actually are carrying some money in the budget this year to provide for that. One of the difficulties is that CPA is still limited to the extent to which we can support a historic preservation survey using admin dollars is largely limited to projects that would be, the information it gives us on projects that would potentially be eligible for CPA funding. So if the Environment Department wanted to do a historic preservation survey and wanted to survey everything, it's not that the CPA could pay for 100% of that survey. We would pay for a portion of that based on what would be useful for the CPC's purposes. So that's something we've actually already been talking with the Environment Department about to see what that funding level might be that CPA could contribute. But we are carrying right now $80,000 in the administrative budget that rolls up to that larger number we're asking for specifically for survey purposes. So it's something that's top of mind for us and we continue to have conversations on.
I appreciate that. I guess I'm slightly confused by, to me, part of the whole goal of pushing towards a sort of citywide historic resource survey, it is to inform strategic planning and kind of, the entire category of historic preservation, across the city. So I don't fully understand sort of the point you're making about eligible versus non-eligible. I can certainly understand that from a CPA perspective, not on else.
Well, I lost a little bit of you there, Counselor, just for a moment, but I think I get the gist of your question. So it's been, so we're very careful with how we spend administrative dollars to make sure that it's an allowable expense. And whether or not it's an allowable expense, as many things are, is subject a bit to interpretation and review by the law department. So we're actually working with CPA's counsel right now to determine, based on what the Environment Department wants to do in developing this historic preservation survey, what specifically we would be able to pay for with administrative dollars. arguably it is potentially broad and we could pay for quite a bit of it, but arguably maybe we couldn't. So those are conversations we're having in conjunction with Environment and the Law Department. I just don't have any specifics right now on to what level we're able to support what the Environment Department proposes.
Okay, great. Well, I would love to be kept abreast of where we're landing with law on that.
Certainly.
And then also, as I think you know, there's a provision in our CPA ordinance that had originally called for a kind of FY17 baseline to be set so that we could kind of track over time what city spending in these categories is. With the goal, of course, being to stay true to the spirit of the statute, that these are additional dollars, not replacement dollars. And I think, you know, as part of a kind of way to report back to taxpayers about the fact that this program has really increased capacity for these things that, as has been discussed, people care quite a lot about. It is like that is in the ordinance that was passed by the council and signed into law. I don't believe that baseline has yet actually been assessed and established. And I would like to know, you know, as we come to, you know, the final days on the FY22 budget, which is of course 5 years past FY17, what the plan and trajectory for getting that done this year is.
Sally and Courtney, is that something, because you're more familiar with the strategic planning RFP, is that component built into the strategic planning analysis or no?
I have to confess, I'm sorry, Councillor Bach, I'm unfamiliar with the baseline you refer to. Could you be more specific?
Yeah, so in the CPA ordinance that Boston passed to enable, after we passed the ballot question, the ordinance that set up the CPC and all, it has a section that said, oh, and Treasury's going to establish what monies were being spent on these eligible purposes in the city budget in FY17. So, which was the last year before it went into practice, such that it would then be possible to track over time sort of our spending in these buckets year on year. And I don't believe that portion of legislation has ever been implemented.
Let me do this then, Councillor. Let me get back to you on that. So I'm not going to have a good answer for you today, but I can certainly get back to you on where we are with that. It may be, sometimes when it says Treasury, it may be that we work in conjunction with OBM in collecting some of that information. So let me get back with you on that.
That would be great. And I'm totally comfortable with not bothering OBM with that until after the FY22 budget process concludes. But
no, and I'm not looking to, before Maura gets on to me, I'm not looking to put any extra work on OBM either. But I just want to make sure we get you a good answer. So we'll get you good data.
Yeah, that would be great. And I just would stress that this is something that that I've raised now for a couple of years at these hearings, and it's just like it needs to happen. So, and then I guess my shoot, I had a last question. Well, CPA bonding. Are we looking into that at all?
It's certainly something that the CPC's discussed. You know, and I've actually, even before Treasury kind of came in and started assisting more specifically with CPC, was something the committee had asked me to come in and talk about, because we obviously do a lot of bonding on the city side. Before we actually bond for something, there would really need to be a need determined that, you know, bonding makes sense. And, you know, the whole point of that obviously would be to go ahead and get a chunk of money up front and pay it off over time. It's something that I would assume will continue to be considered. There's not been a demonstrated need just yet. Oftentimes you see in other communities that bond, what they're doing it for is to fund a single large transformational project and then pay that off over the next 10, 15, or 20 years. In Boston, what we generally see, the applicants we generally see come in with CPC dollars are relatively smaller projects, not small, but relatively smaller, that wouldn't necessarily require any type of bonding to get done. So to the extent that there's a larger project that comes in, or based on what the strategic planning analysis looks like, because there's going to be a lot of conversations around that, it may be something we could do in the future. We're certainly not closed off from the idea.
Great. Yeah, it strikes me that it's something I would hope that we would at least have sort of enough technical expertise supporting the CPC and the strategic plan on this front that they sort of understand the option. Because to my instinct, it's a useful thing to have in that conversation for two reasons. One is because I wouldn't be surprised if we found that we did want to think about making space for some bigger projects in our CPA, planning and trajectory. I mean, frankly, I think that if CPA ended up taking up a significant portion of a citywide historic preservation survey, that's certainly an example of something like that potentially. But I also think that being strategic about, I'm well aware that CPA bonding isn't necessarily going to compete with or make sense as an alternative to geo bonding for a lot of our types of projects, but it does strike me that things where we can't geo bond because ownership ends up in private hands, even if it's a nonprofit or whatever, certainly this seems like a rare mechanism for the city in a sense to bond on behalf of those things. And I would want strategic planning to be informed by informed technical assistance on those fronts.
Well, I'm going to be, so you're exactly right. And the CPC or the CPA does give additional bonding flexibility that doesn't exist under standard constitution, what we can constitutionally bond for or would bond for. That I'm going to be a part of the strategic planning discussion. And certainly as it relates to bonds, I would imagine that that's going to come up and the potential options here. So I hear you and I don't disagree. So it's something we'll continue to discuss.
Great. Thanks so much, Drew. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions.
Thank you, Kenzie. Great questions. And we've also been joined by my colleague, City Council President Matt OMalley. Before Matt goes to questions, Drew, who does the CPA or CPC, who do you use as your attorneys? Are you using the law department? Obviously, we would encourage them to work closely with the council committee, but also our attorney is Christine O'Donnell, who does great work and reviews all of these proposals in conjunction with me as the chair. So, and as Council Bark was just referencing on sort of, and we're answering on the bonding side of the house, clearly, whether it's bond counsel or underwriting counsel, clearly we need to be using counsel. And I guess would those funds be used from the administrative cost to pay for, I guess, outside bond counsel or underwriting counsel? So, I mean, these are some moving parts, but if we're going to go down the road of bonding, we need to factor those into into expenses, et cetera. So what are your thoughts, and who are you guys conferring with? Is it corporation counsel, or do you have different counsel?
Well, it's a great question. Thank you. So for standard programmatic questions, we work specifically with corporation counsel. If we got to the point to where we needed a bond counsel, the answer is I'm not sure. So you would be in a situation where either, in theory, the CPA could potentially select its own bond counsel, or we could have a separate bond counsel specifically for CPA, or what is probably more likely, Counselor, is that we would use the city's bond counsel, which is Loch Lord, specifically Walter St. Onge over there. Certainly, as we start to get into the discussion, if we have questions that around allowability that we want to put in front of a bond counsel, that's exactly who we do it. So we already have somebody that we retain that we could ask those questions to. So we're certainly not going to be slowed down because we don't have a council. We would just use the cities.
Got it. Very good. The chair recognizes City Council President Matt OMalley for questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Drew, great to see you. To your entire team, it's great to be with you. I apologize for being late. You may have gone over this. My only questions, I'm referring to sort of the docket overview for this, for the funding that Christine O'Donnell, I believe, sent to us earlier today. And it's more of a technical question. In the appropriated for projects, the second from the bottom line, and then remaining for the following year, of course, in FY19, about $35 million appropriated for projects. We kept a small amount, just under 200,000. Following year is about 24 million appropriated for projects, and then there was a healthy 10%, I guess I'd call it a reserve, $25 million for this year. It may be too early to get the exact number, but is our percentage that we're saving sort of remaining in that 10% ballpark?
Maura, do you have any information on that?
So are you asking what would be the, let's call it surplus that we'll have at the end of the current fiscal year? Or you talk? Okay.
And again, I may be referencing a sheet that you don't have in front of you, so I apologize. There's a sheet that breaks down the account name, the actuals, budget, and recommended 1920, and this is just the bottom. I'm just curious how much we typically save. 10% seems like a pretty good goalpost to try to meet.
Yeah, so I think obviously these are very preliminary numbers because 21 is not over yet, and the last month of the fiscal year always have a lot of year-end movements. I think for 21, we might be a little bit higher than that 10% we saw in 20, and that is going to be solely because of the state match that we received in fiscal year 21, which was 150% larger than in previous years because of the state supplemental. So instead of receiving what we thought is going to be around 3 million, we received a little over 6 million. So that is going to, and we didn't account for that. So that's going to push our surplus a little bit higher for this year. But it's not something that should happen year over year.
I see. But would then, that's helpful, and that's, I think, prudent, and that's good news. So let me get that out of the way. In terms of what's anticipated for the state match for FY22, do we think we're going to be more in the $3 million or $6 million ballpark?
So we're budgeting based on the 3 million, which is basically we're budgeting 15% of what we collected in surcharge, because that's how they calculate the state match. So we're assuming the 3.3 million. But there is, if the state is doing a supplemental in October, we could get more. But it could be that we are only going to get a little bit more, and it could. There are so many unknowns in terms of if there's going to be a supplemental and how it's going to be. So we're budgeting based on the 3 million.
Fabulous. And if we don't hit those high numbers, then Treasurer Smith is going to have to sell his Selena Meyer coffee cup to help make up the difference for it. So thank you all. Obviously, to the chair, Michael Flaherty, who's been just such a leader on CPA for long before my time in this body. These are exciting. You guys have done such an amazing, you've done such an amazing job on this, working with the committee, really identifying needed areas and always looking through the ends of equity. I've been so proud to have been part of the council that helped get CPA on the ballot through Michael Flaherty's leadership. And I've just been I remain incredibly grateful to each and every one of you, because it's a feel-good thing, and it's another example of what government ought to be doing, which is serving the people of the city and guests of the city. And we've done some really remarkable work working together in that time. So obviously really grateful for all of your leadership and work. Look forward to another successful round of funding. So that's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind words. And we've also been joined by City Councilor Ed Flynn. So right before Ed's questions, Drew and/or more question, because Councilor OMalley drew me to the sort of line item portion. But so contracted services, obviously the first year was just getting started was 5,400, and then year one was 72, and then it jumped up significantly to 320. Now it's 455. Can you just give me a snapshot of what those contracted services are, and so who are we contracting out with? And are those functions, if you will, that could be captured in-house? And could we be doing that? Could we be providing those services in-house as opposed to contracting outside? So, and I only say that because that's a $500,000 number there that started at $5,400. So as clearly as the program grew, which we fully anticipated in its interest and the excitement all around it and the application process, as we knew there would be a ramp up, and we're on a trajectory here. Like, so next time it's going to be probably 6 something. And then the one after that's going to be 8 something. And the one after that's going to be $1 million. And then people are going to say, well, it's an IPOP. Who are we contracting with? What services are we going outside for that we cannot be handling inside? So I guess that's what are the range of contracted services that are in that $455,000 number?
You bet. So the contracted services cover a couple of different things. One of the things it covers specifically, which is driver of it, are the consultant. Would it be great as full-time city employees to do a lot of that work? I think yes, and I think that that's probably the way we agree with you, and that's probably the way we go eventually. But while we build out the program, this has been the approach that we've decided to take and put that under contracted services. So that accounts for a chunk of it. Another chunk of that is going to be what I talked to Councilor Bark about earlier, which was the historic preservation survey. The strategic planning survey that we've got RFP'd right now, that's dropped in there. And so then that would certainly be a chunk. And then we have some money in there for technical support for this time around. So I would say that the growth you're seeing over the last couple of years is primarily due to the bringing on of consultants, but also the strategic planning, which the planning support we have budgeted here at $75,000 this time around. It is a component that makes up that number. And then the historic preservation survey is $80,000. So there's a few things in there that would not be ongoing costs necessarily, but at least the consultant side of it is. We expect it to be for the next couple of years. But as far as you're concerned about seeing that trend line and being rightly concerned that it may continue up at its current trajectory, that is not what's anticipated. That's certainly not what we anticipate. We have got nearly the consultants that we're going to need for a period of time now.
Very good. Thank you, Drew. We've also been joined by my colleague at large, City Councilor Anissa Sabi-George. Councilor Flynn, you're up, and then followed by Councilor Sabi-George.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and to Councilor Campbell and actually Councilor Bark as well for your tremendous work over the years on CPA. It's greatly appreciated. And I know the residents respect the work that you've done bringing CPA to Boston. So just want to acknowledge some of my colleagues, and also the City Council Attorney, Christine O'Donnell, has done an excellent job as well, working with Councilor Flaherty on CPA-related issues. I want to say thank you to the CPA team that is here now. What I like about this program is it brings out the best in our city. Residents come together. They love listening to proposals that might not even be in their own neighborhood, but they're always learning about different parts of Boston and getting ideas about what could happen in their neighborhood. So I like the program a lot because it unites us instead of the division we often see in our country. So continue the good work of the CPA team, continue reaching out to residents, asking their opinion, explaining the program. It goes a long way, and I'm proud of the work that the CPA team has done and continues to do. I have no questions, Councilor Flaherty. I just want to acknowledge the CPA team.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. Unless Councilor Flaherty, you want me to start asking tough questions, I can do that. That's well, I know the next person that was up was Councilor Sabi-George. Maybe Councilor Sabi-George, do you want to jump in next?
I'll jump in. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. What looks like we have lost.
Thank you. No, thank you, Eddie. I'm having reception problems, but. Chair recognizes Councilor Sabi-George.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councilor Flynn for holding that gavel for a few moments. I apologize for tuning into this meeting late, so I don't have any questions. Just, I think, in echoing some of what, or all of what Councilor Flynn just mentioned, just grateful that we have this opportunity before us and that it has become a vehicle for community to engage and support efforts across all of our neighborhoods at some point or another. But this is good stuff. If I could hashtag that, and look forward to this being presented before the body next week. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. I don't see any additional colleagues looking to add any comments or testimony. Kerry, at this time, are there any members of the public that are in the waiting room looking to offer public testimony at this time?
Not currently, Mr. Chair.
Very good. So that will conclude the public testimony portion of it. As mentioned, they could tune into broadcast as well as send written correspondence to their district or at-large colleagues or to the committee directly at ccc.cpa.gov. So that said, that will conclude unless Drew or Moore or Sarah or Courtney have anything additional to add. Very productive. We're obviously very proud to have CPA up and running and the CPC working closely with the Boston City Council and putting a lot of great things, projects and particularly around affordable housing and open space and historic preservation. So it's exciting, obviously, to be participating as a member of the council, to have been involved in the first effort when we come up a little short, but undeterred, and finally got the matter back on and passed on the ballot. So it's exciting to be a member of the council, particularly as a citywide city councilor, and you go across the city, and whether it's the community groups or the friends groups, advocates, those little special places and landmarks in all of our neighborhoods where you could add some hope and restore those beautiful edifices. So it's all good stuff from our perspective. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing and the attention to detail that goes into it. The volume of applications continues to increase. The excitement around the process, which has been a great process, fully transparent, and you appreciate when folks come up a little short 1 year and then they go back to the drawing board and they work with the folks at CPC to kind of enhance their position. You guys do great work, as Council Flynn as referenced earlier, hosting you folks to come out into the community to educate the civic associations and the community organizations as to how to go about putting their best foot forward to compete for these very precious funds. So it's all good stuff. So I appreciate it. I'm proud to turn around a committee report, get this before the council for a vote ASAP. So with that, unless anyone else, anything else for me, it's been a pleasure to see all of you guys. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties in the beginning, but that will conclude this hearing. So with respect to docket, let me find my sheets here. Docket 0548, message in order approving an appropriation of $1,012,400 for administrative expenses of City of Boston CPC, as well as $28,479,574 for the Community Preservation Fund. The Committee on Community Preservation will be adjourned. Thank you and good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.